Welcome to Beyond the Circle, a podcast that brings people together for meaningful conversations about culture, community, and connection. I'm your host, Jeremy Cammey. Each episode dives into compelling stories, big ideas, and behind-the-scenes moments from events and experiences that shape our world. Whether it's arts, music, storytelling, or social impact, Beyond the Circle is your place for engaging discussions with inspiring voices. Today we have an exclusive. We welcome Wendy Sachs, the director of October 8th, a powerful documentary that captures the personal and collective impact of that day. Wendy is also an accomplished producer, writer, and author of 2 books, known for her insightful storytelling and ability to bring important narratives to life. We'll dive into her journey, the making of October 8th, and the stories that shaped this film. October 8th is in select theaters across Canada right now. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Wendy.
Hi there.
So, Wendy, I was at the advanced screening. The credits rolled. The room is silent. And I'm sure you've been to some of your previews and you've seen that. You could feel the weight of the room of, I think, what people experienced. Then slowly the applause started, almost like the audience needed a moment to process before reacting. So as we begin this podcast, my question is, take us back to the moment that you knew you had to make this film, and what was the catalyst for the story?
It was really on October 8th. It was, watching what was happening in Times Square when we saw Hamas being celebrated as freedom fighters rather than as terrorists. And really later, hearing that it was later that day and the next day when the news came out about Harvard and more than 30 student groups that had signed on to a letter blaming Israel for the attack on itself. And then it was like the domino effect on American college campuses, of just blaming Israel, right? No sympathy for what had happened. Bodies hadn't even been collected yet. We didn't even know the extent of the atrocities. And I was watching what was happening in London with those crazy protests in London the same day on October 8th. And there was a celebration, right, of Hamas. And it was that coupled over the next few weeks with the silence from women's rights organizations and UN Women, and frankly, my own professional women's groups that had just been splintered by what was happening. These are the same groups that were, speaking out on Boko Haram when they had kidnapped, the Chibok schoolgirls, and speak out on all sorts of other social justice issues. And there was silence when it came to the atrocities that we had just seen in Israel. So it was in those few weeks, beginning on October 8th, but then those next few weeks, watching the hostility build mixed with the silence from Hollywood and Capitol Hill and human rights organizations and women's organizations and my own personal and professional networks, that I knew I needed to do something. It didn't take me long to realize that the story was epic. And, as everyone says, the silence is deafening. And that's exactly what it was.
The story is epic, and you're an author, you're a producer, a director. This is obviously not your first documentary, but my question to you is that I'm watching this documentary, and the biggest challenge is telling the stories and finding the right voices. How do you find the right voices as a director?
It's casting. I went to sort of the most expert voices who I could find. It was really important to me to have people across the political spectrum, but people who are not so extreme. In fact, I did about 80 interviews for the film. I think 38 of them made it into the film. There's a lot of people who I just decided to leave out. Not because some people didn't fit into a scene, but also they didn't have the credibility. They didn't really hold up. And then I was also watching people go on cable news outlets that are just very extreme. And I wanted to make sure that my film, which I knew was going to go under so much scrutiny, really had an integrity, a journalistic integrity to it. So that's first and foremost, is that I'm a journalist, not just like a storyteller. And so fact checking and having the most sort of credible voices is really important to me. And then it's really just great characters. It's, really compelling stories. And I interviewed, I think, 20 college students. And, some had better stories than others. There was a few really good storytellers and had some really compelling personal stories where they were really harassed and that didn't make it into the film. So there's a lot of things that honestly go into it. It's their story arc, their narrative, but how well that they're going to hold up under any sort of, lens, I guess, a microscope, just given the content of what I'm presenting, and knowing that it's going to be challenged, and knowing that I'm going to be framed as some sort of like right winger Zionist propagandist. I needed to make sure everything's really buttoned up, and it is. And also to have non-Jewish voices in the film. Very, very important.
Agreed. Allies. I'm interested in the weaving of the story that you speak of, because for me, stories connect us. And this is a two-pronged question. The first of which is, as you're filming, were there any moments that you didn't expect? And then the follow-up question to that is, how did you gain the trust of those voices in the film? Because as I'm watching it, there are some really deep personal stories.
Yeah. So the first thing that I didn't expect was just really connecting the dots between SJP and Hamas. I did not know that there was such a direct connection. And in fact, I really challenged one of my experts, Safra Morawski, to prove to me when he said Hamas is in America. I was like, well, what do you really mean? Do you really mean, like, can you really prove that to me? So I needed to see the evidence, and then connecting on the funding, like this idea that SJP, Students for Justice in Palestine, on American college campuses is really connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, to Iran. That to me is like really sort of mind-boggling, because most people just don't understand that or don't accept that. They just think it's another student group, and it's not. And it's largely not even controlled by students. And it's, so there's so much, it's very hazy to understand sort of who they are. Also, even JVP, Jewish Voices for Peace, they're not Jewish and they're not for peace. But to even explore that, we don't really get into that in the film. But when I was doing my research and in my investigation, I was really unpacking who they are too. So that was pretty fascinating. And to understand that Hamas in America has been playing the long game and figuring out how to infiltrate American college campuses and media institutions. And we reveal this FBI wiretap in the film that goes back to a Marriott hotel room in 1993. Very mind-blowing. So when I did that interview with Lorenzo Vidino in June, deep into production, we had already developed our SJP scenes that blew up our entire scene. And now we had a foundation to really show, wait, they knew what they were doing. They've been here. And that to me was that was unexpected. And then building trust is just, I've been doing this for a long time. I started as a booker at Dateline NBC back in the 90s. Booking people and developing relationships with people and getting people to trust you that's my superpower. That's my secret sauce. Like, that is what I'm able to do really well. And it's all about trust in those relationships.
That 93 moment, for me, I remember it specifically because you show a clip of the outside of the Marriott hotel with the red marquee, so to speak. So this is my question. It's interesting because, do you start with a clear vision, or did the story guide you as you go along?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, we were doing a lot of research. We did a lot of interviews. Jonathan Shanzer gave us a lot. I spoke to a lot of different experts in the field to explain to me Hamas in America. I mean, there's a Holy Land Foundation case that was from 2001, and that's where there's a lot of testimony, congressional record on what had happened in tracing. The Treasury Department was tracing funding from Hamas into America through nonprofits. 5 people were convicted. They were sent to prison. A few people were deported. That you don't even see in the film because we left that out. That was an earlier iteration of the scene. So we already knew what was developing, and then there's even more. So then, scenes get transformed, but we already are establishing the fact that Hamas in America has been around for a while. But to show the real connection to SJP wasn't as clear as it later developed. So it's a little bit of both. It's a little chicken and egg.
This anti-Semitism, and we could take it way back even further than obviously October 7th. For you, though, this is a deep emotional investment. So my question then is, how do you navigate the weight of the story and the pressure?
That's a great question. I think I was almost had like a messianic vision for this film. I was a pro-Israel activist on college campuses. On my college campus, I went to Northwestern University in Chicago and Evanston, Illinois. I had done a program called the Alexander Muss High School in Israel program when I was 17 years old. My family had never been to Israel. I'm secular. I'm from Miami, Florida. They sent me to Israel, and I was like, drank the Kool-Aid, and I heard about AIPAC, which is this big pro-Israel lobby in America. And I heard that they have these Israel activists, pro-Israel activists on college campuses. And I knew that I wanted to get involved. And so I have a very strong working foundation of Israel and the history and all of it. And I felt like I was the one to tell the story. And I had also been sort of obsessed over the past decade or so with how the narrative has been so corrupted and how smart people who I respect and other smart Jewish people who I respect who are in progressive spaces, as am I, had really just, been fed propaganda of Israel as this apartheid colonialist state. And they just didn't understand. They didn't understand the complexities or the nuances or any of it. And so going into this film, I knew I needed to let people know about the bias in the media. Like so many of us say the New York Times is terrible in Israel, NPR, the BBC, all of these outlets. I wanted to be able to show that in a way that was like, here's an example of how that happened. And we see that with the headlines changing with the so-called hospital bombing where 500 people are killed and they take the Hamas's statement over the IDF. I wanted to show the NGO bias, the UN bias. There's all of these things that I know about because I've followed the story so closely and I'm pretty informed that I know that most other people don't know. So I went in with a strong vision of like, I'm going to create the film that no one else is going to tell. I'm going to give you the story that no one would ever greenlight because they would think it was like, such a strong, point of view, but I'm going to do it in a way that's really journalistically responsible, that doesn't come off as ideological or political. I'm just going to show you the receipts. We're going to show you what's going on and hear these personal stories. So to me, one of the most compelling stories in the film, it often doesn't get a lot of attention when I do these interviews, but it's Danielle Haas from Human Rights Watch, who winds up resigning, and she gives her whole story. And she'd been, at this organization for like 12 or 13 years. And she's the only Israeli, in this entire organization. And after October 7th, she explains what happens. Human Rights Watch is a place that media organizations across the world go to as almost like the good housekeeping stamp of approval on human rights. So when they, publish, every year their annual study on human rights abuses, and Israel's is, 5 times as long as China or Iran or Sudan, like none of it makes any sense. And you just see the bias, but other people just don't understand that. But these are the things that I was like, we need to let people know that it's complicated. It's like a Venn diagram of how we got to this moment where Hamas is being celebrated as freedom fighters and Israelis are the worst of humanity. So how did we get here? That the depravity and the brutality that Israel witnessed, is just completely dismissed or diminished because it's like they had it coming. That's what I wanted to explore. There's so much that's baked in here.
I think it's great. Look, I want to unpack that for a second. You talk about the vision. You talk about the fact you have receipts. My question, and I'm not a filmmaker, you are, did you have any fear about making this film? That once it was released, would there be pushback? Would there be personal attacks against you and perhaps your credibility? I remember Michael Rappaport in the film says that he's the guy, like he's the biggest celebrity. There are plenty of other celebrities that should be talking out, but it's him. So I guess my question was there any type of fear? Was there trepidation on making the film?
No, I had no fear of making the film. I was just so laser focused on telling the story that needed to be told. I was like obsessed with this. I have not slept in like 17 months. I'm not even kidding. I have been working it like just killing myself. I have put everything I have into this project. And I was so laser focused on raising the money for the film It's all donor funded. And then because so many people trusted me with so much money, I felt this like responsibility to get it right. I just felt this like incredible responsibility that people have never written a check for a film before. Were trusting me to get the story right and to tell the story. And I did, and I was just so focused. And I what was more, difficult was not fear of retaliation or hate or any of that. It was just like, how am I going to get it out in the world, given all of the headwinds we're up against with distribution and with the entertainment industry and with Hollywood and with documentaries. Documentaries are hard to do. Any documentary is hard to distribute, let alone something like this. So what just kept me going was people saying yes to the project. I have like incredible voices. What kept me going was like the donors behind me who gave me the money, and I got incredible talent on board with this film, and people just saying, this needs to be done. This is really important. Thank you for doing it. When I went to Israel and I filmed twice, I was there first in January of 2024, and then again in June. When I went in January, there were no Americans, there were no Canadians. There was no one speaking English when I was in Israel. I don't speak any Hebrew. And I had never been to Israel before, where I heard literally no English. And I was in Tel Aviv for a week and heard not one word of English. And why that's so significant is because people were not there. People were afraid. This is before everyone was doing, going down to tour the kibbutzim and all of that, but I was filming. And wherever I went, people said, thank you. Thank you. My hotel concierge, my hotel was being converted into basically like a hostel for people from the kibbutzim, people's like families, like, Tel Aviv was upside down. And you couldn't even get a hotel room because they were, all, Israelis who had been displaced. And I remember getting a coffee and just, again, the barista was like, thank you. Thank you. Everywhere on the street, I would say, I'm here filming. Thank you. Thank you for being here and bearing witness. And so that sense of just bearing witness and being responsible to tell the story that everyone needs to know was just drove me like a maniac to make this film and to get it out in the world. And I think that it was part of my almost like ridiculous manic drive to get it done that got other people to support the project. And it was like it just all built on itself. But no, there's no fear. I mean, I'm getting some hate now, not to the levels that Deborah and Michael and Richie Torres and other people in the film receive. We were protested last night, and I'm seeing some stuff online now. I've seen my face in some graphics and all of that. That motivates me, to be honest. It makes me push even harder. Like, we are outnumbered just as a people, but we're going to push back. And I'm seeing even within the communities become tighter. There's a sense that we're in it together. And this film is resonating here in Canada, around the world.
Oh, I can sense the passion through the screen right now, and I'm loving it. There's a moment in the film, and correct me if I'm wrong, and I might be. I literally just saw it, as 12 or 14 hours ago. Mm-hmm. It's a student who visits the Nova exhibition, the Nova site, and she is surrounded by all the pictures of those that were murdered, and she can't even speak. Every time she speaks, she's just crying. And at one point, she puts her hand over her mouth, and I think she looks away from the camera because she's just crying too much. And it's probably never too much. My question for you is, you said you've been to Israel twice. For those of us that haven't been to the site.
I've been to Israel more times. But yes, twice since October 7th.
Twice, for filming.
Yes.
That moment, and maybe that resonated with you, and that might have been the most powerful moment for me. So this is a two-part question. The first of which is, take us back to possibly that day. And also as well, personally for you, what was it like when you visited the site for the first time?
So the kibbutzim I went to in January, and then I returned again in June, because you saw Irit Lahab, the survivor. We go back to her house. The Nova site I didn't go to until June. And that's actually sort of a wild story. I had not gone my first time in January. We were driving by it, and even I was with an Israeli production team, and they said, "Do you want to go to the Nova site?" And I said, "No." In my head at the time, I was like, this is not about the Nova Festival. I'm talking about more about the sort of, this is through the lens of an American Jew and the experience and what was happening in the States. And it's not going to be survivor stories. It's not going to be hero stories or other films that are in production on that. And I had a very strong idea of what I wanted. And I knew after I interviewed Irit in January, she was telling me about these text messages that were happening in the kibbutzim and her kibbutz. And I said, wait, can you read them to me? And as soon as she started reading them to me from her phone, I knew I had the open to the film. And I knew I was going to want to cut back and forth between Israel and the US to show this sort of connection and what we're feeling on October 7th and bring it together. And it's like, it's happening here, but we're feeling it here. And this is sort of how we're dealing with it. And I knew that. But I didn't go to the Nova site. And then, funny enough, not funny, but interestingly, I saw the Sheryl Sandberg film, and she was walking around the Nova site, and I thought, my God, I can't believe I didn't go there. I can't believe I don't have those images of those flags and those beautiful faces. And wow, this is incredibly powerful. When I go back to Israel, which I was planning on, I absolutely have to go down to Nova. I need to experience this for myself. And I also need to capture this and also see, it's not just Israeli flags, you see American flags in there too, because obviously like Canadians, there's American, Israeli citizens and all of that. So I land in Israel, as many of us do, very early in the morning. And I can't check into my hotel room yet. My room's not available. And I'm staying on, a hotel on the Tel Aviv promenade. I leave my luggage. I change into shorts and I get coffee and I start taking a walk on the promenade. And it's 9:00 in the morning on a Sunday morning or something. And I walk right into Talia Khan. I'm on the promenade for 10 minutes before I walk right into that MIT student who I had filmed with a few times. I had no idea that she was going to be in Israel. It was completely random. And I was, what are you doing here? And
this is completely unplanned?
Completely unplanned. So
just by chance, you walk outside and you bump into each other?
Literally walk outside. There's like no one on the promenade because it's early. And I see Talia Khan with a friend walking towards me. And I was like, Talia? And, we hug each other. I said, what are you doing here? She was there because she was actually invited, I think, by the Bibi government to do something on anti-Semitism and college students in the United States. And anyhow, so she's there. And I said, what are you doing on Thursday? I'm going to go down to the Nova site. I would really love for you to come with me. Because now I'm thinking, well, this is amazing. So we had her, I filmed with her in New York. I filmed with her on campus at MIT. She's organically here in Israel. And I would like to bring her to the Nova site and have her, speak to it and have her experience it. And I don't know if she's even seen it before. And she said, I haven't been, and I'm free on Thursday. Yes, I'll go with you. And then that scene became one of the most powerful ones in the film. And listen, she's a graduate student. She's, I think, 24, 25, something like that. So she's looking at these pictures of these other young women who are her age. And it's very authentic. It's very real. It's resonating. And, and then listen, you could hear the bombs over, bombing Gaza. You hear the explosions. And I wanted to acknowledge that also, to not, the elephant in the room is we are 2 miles from a war. And, even how to handle that was very sensitive about, and I said to her, what are we hearing? Tell me what you're hearing. Tell me how you feel about that. Tell me, explain to me, and then she does it so well of saying I understand why, people are upset. And it was very important. We could have spent, if we had more time in the film, we did go back and forth with my editors about how much time to give that without it feeling just tokenizing. There's so much nuance into the storytelling here, knowing what we're going to hear from the other side, knowing how reviewers are going to perceive this. And I wanted to handle it in a way of, yeah, this is what's happening. We hear the bombs. It's terrible.
And I remember as she's speaking, we hear the bomb. And I actually looked physically around the theater thinking, did I just hear something? Was it edited? What is that? And you're right. It's true. And these are all stories that somehow tie together. Were there any scenes or stories that didn't make it into the film, but still stay with you?
There are so many. I mean, listen, and I think I mentioned this last night, one of my favorite characters, and we just didn't give him, we didn't create the scenes that I wanted to with him, is Hillel Neuer from UN Watch. He's incredible. He's been fighting the fight with the United Nations for decades now. He's the guy who's been calling out UNRWA for I don't know how long, years and years and years. He's incredible. But then there's another student, Shabbos Kestenbaum from Harvard, who has a wild story about being targeted by a Harvard employee who, like, literally the guy works at Harvard in the engineering program or something. He's a legitimate employee at Harvard who went after Shabbos and was posting videos of the man himself holding a machete with Shabbos's face and saying how he was going to go after him. And wanting to meet him and threatening. And Shabbos, this graduate student in the divinity school, needed to hire security to travel with him. He's at Harvard. I mean, it was a wild story, and it didn't make it into the film for a number of reasons. There was sort of no home for it. I also would need to be going to this man and getting his story also, and just trying to, dig into it a little bit more. But there are some really outrageous incidents that we heard about that didn't make it into the film. There really is so much. Again, every scene could be an entire documentary. There's so much there. And Inette Wolf, who's a tremendous voice on explaining and unpacking the history of all of this, also academia and going back to Columbia University. There's so much interesting stuff, but we wanted to make sure that the film moved, that the pacing was there to keep young people engaged, to make sure that it wasn't too academic or not too wonky. So while I can geek out to a lot of this stuff, I wanted to make sure that, that my 21-year-old daughter would watch it.
My final question. You're sitting beside someone. There it is. You're sitting beside someone and they're watching October 8th for the very first time. What do you want to say to them before the film begins?
Keep an open mind. And depending on where they're coming from, their point of view, if I'm talking to another Jewish person, I think it's very different. If they're sort of, I would say have some sense or are on, the right side of the issue, then I would say, buckle up and you might want to watch this twice because there's so much here. I mean, people are watching this 2 and 3 times, and people say it's even better the second time, to be honest, because you're seeing things that you didn't catch the first time because it moves so fast. But for someone who just really doesn't know much, I would say we're showing you the evidence. Let the facts speak for themselves. Like, just pay attention to the facts.
There you go, folks. That's what we got. That's the time. Wendy, thank you for your vision. Thank you for your storytelling. Thank you for your directing. And more importantly, thanks for fighting the good fight, because we have a long way to go.
We do. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. All the best. Thanks for joining us. Every story brings us closer. Every voice adds to the conversation. Thanks for being part of the circle. Until next time, stay engaged, stay inspired, and keep building community. I'm Jeremy Cammey.